You weren't late. You weren't forgotten. You were being rebuilt for something most people can't handle. What if the universe didn't delay your life, but protected it? What if every closed door, every slow season, every painful pause was part of a precise psychological preparation? This isn't comfort talk. It's a hard truth most people never hear. Arriving too early would have destroyed you. Carl Jung believed that destiny doesn't reward speed, it rewards readiness. And once you see this, the frustration you've been carrying starts to dissolve into clarity. This video reveals why your delays had meaning, how suffering shaped your strength, and how patience quietly turned you into someone capable of carrying what you once begged for. The moment you understand this, your past stops haunting you and starts empowering you. You didn't get stuck. It only felt that way. What really happened is quieter, deeper, and far more deliberate. Life slowed you down not to frustrate you, but to reshape you. Like steel held in fire just long enough to change its structure, your delay was a form of preparation. In moments where progress seemed invisible, your inner world was being reorganized. This is how transformation works, subtle, almost rude in its silence. You thought nothing was happening, but meaning was forming beneath the surface, guided by the unconscious, molding patience into your bones. Think about it. Every time you tried to force the outcome, something resisted. That resistance wasn't bad luck. It was a boundary, the kind that says, not yet. Delay is rarely empty. It's usually full of lessons we don't want to learn. Suffering sneaks in here not as punishment, but as a sculptor. And yes, it hurts, but without that friction, there's no individuation, no real becoming. Destiny doesn't rush. It ripens. And you were still ripening even when it felt like life had forgotten your address. Look at nature for a second. You don't yell at a seed for not becoming a tree overnight. You water it. You give it darkness, pressure, time. Roots grow before anything shows above ground. That's exactly what happened to you. While you were obsessing over timelines, your shadow was being exposed, challenged, and slowly integrated. That job you didn't get, that relationship that collapsed, that phase where nothing clicked, each one carved depth. Delay protected you from success you weren't yet strong enough to carry. Here's something practical. When life slows you down again, and it will, stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this shaping in me?" Journal it. Literally write down patterns you're noticing, repeated conflicts, emotional triggers, fears that keep resurfacing. Read books that sharpen self-awareness. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Modern Man in Search of a Soul by Carl Jung. These aren't just books, they're mirrors. The more conscious you become, the less wasted time you experience. And here's the part most people miss. Once preparation is complete, things move fast, almost violently fast. Opportunities stack, decisions feel clearer. You act with patience instead of panic. That's when destiny stops whispering and starts knocking. But to understand why this preparation was necessary, you first have to look at the part of you that needed refining, the part most people avoid entirely. And that's where the next layer begins. Waiting isn't passive, even though it looks that way from the outside. When life made you wait, it wasn't checking your patience, it was testing your depth. Anyone can act when momentum is high, but very few can stay grounded when nothing seems to move. That's where character is revealed. In the quiet stretch, when validation disappeared and results stalled, your soul was being weighed. Not judged, measured for endurance, for emotional maturity, for meaning. Because whatever you ask for later will demand more from you than you expect. You probably felt invisible during this phase, like the world kept going while you stood still. And yeah, that stings. But invisibility has a purpose. When no one is watching, masks fall off. You stop performing and start confronting what's real. The waiting stripped you of shortcuts. It forced you to sit with your own thoughts, doubts, and unresolved questions. This is where patience stops being a virtue and becomes a skill, trained through discomfort, repetition, and restraint. Here's the paradox most people never grasp. Impatience weakens desire. When you want something too fast, you don't want it deeply, you want relief. The waiting phase separates shallow wanting from soul-level commitment. That's why so many people quit here. They confuse delay with rejection, but delay is selective. It filters out those who are chasing outcomes instead of growth. If you stayed, even while doubting yourself, that means something in you was stronger than your fear. Try this the next time you feel stuck in waiting mode. Shift your focus from outcomes to capacity. Ask yourself, what am I becoming capable of right now? Maybe it's emotional regulation, maybe it's discipline, maybe it's learning to be alone without feeling empty. Build routines that reinforce this. Daily walks without your phone, focused reading sessions, quiet mornings before the world intrudes. These practices don't look impressive, but they fortify the unconscious. They expand the container that will later hold success, meaning, and responsibility. And here's the truth that hits hardest. The waiting ends the moment you're no longer desperate for it to end. That's usually when movement begins. Subtle at first. A conversation, an insight, a decision that suddenly feels obvious. But before that shift can fully happen, there's something else you have to recognize. The waiting didn't just test your patience, it forced you to face resistance itself. And resistance always has something to teach. Resistance isn't the enemy you thought it was. It's more like a strict mentor, annoying, persistent, and always standing exactly where you want to go. Every time you tried to move forward and hit a wall, that wall was asking a question. Who are you becoming if you push through this? Most people turn back, not because they can't continue, but because resistance exposes weakness, and weakness bruises the ego. Yet this is precisely where transformation begins, at the edge of discomfort. Notice how resistance shows up: procrastination, doubt, sudden distractions, emotional fatigue. These aren't random, they're signals from the unconscious, pointing to something unresolved. When you resist resistance, it grows heavier. When you study it, it becomes useful. Think of resistance like weight training for the soul. The bar doesn't move easily, and that's the point. Without that load, there's no strength, no patience, no real individuation. Destiny demands muscle, not wishes. You've probably experienced this in real life. Maybe you avoided a hard conversation that could have changed everything. Maybe you delayed starting a project because it scared you. Or maybe success felt close, but self-sabotage stepped in. That wasn't laziness. It was fear of expansion. Growth threatens the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. Resistance protects identity, not happiness. It guards the version of you that feels safe staying the same. Here's something practical you can apply immediately. When resistance appears, don't ask how to get rid of it. Ask what it's guarding. Write it down. If you feel resistance toward discipline, maybe it's protecting comfort. If you resist visibility, maybe it's shielding an old wound. Then take one small, deliberate action that leans into the discomfort. Send the message. Start the page. Speak the truth. Momentum doesn't come from confidence. Confidence comes from movement. Once you stop fighting resistance and start learning from it, something shifts. The wall becomes a doorway. What blocked you begins to shape you. And slowly, patience replaces frustration. You realize the obstacle wasn't stopping destiny, it was refining it. But there's a deeper truth hiding underneath all of this. Sometimes resistance exists because arriving too early would have destroyed you. And that realization changes everything. There are destinations that look harmless from a distance, but demand more than you can give when you arrive too soon. You thought you were late. In reality, you were being protected. If certain doors had opened earlier, they would have crushed you under responsibility you hadn't yet integrated. Success isn't just an opportunity, it's a psychological weight. And the unconscious knows when the structure isn't strong enough to hold it. Think about how many people get what they want too fast and then unravel. Fame without identity, money without meaning, power without patience. These things don't elevate. They expose. Delay is the safeguard that prevents collapse. You weren't being denied, you were being reinforced. Layer by layer, experience by experience, life was strengthening your inner architecture so you wouldn't break once pressure arrived. This is why timing feels cruel until it makes sense. You wanted outcomes. Life wanted maturity. You wanted movement. Life demanded depth. Every setback forced you to build internal systems, emotional regulation, self-trust, discernment. Without them, arrival would have been premature. And premature arrival doesn't feel like victory. It feels like anxiety, imposter syndrome, and self-sabotage dressed as success. Here's a grounded way to work with this insight. Prepare as if the door will open tomorrow, but live as if it won't. Develop skills that compound quietly. Read books that refine thinking. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Train discipline in small ways, consistent sleep, daily movement, finishing what you start. These habits don't rush destiny, they signal readiness to it. The moment you stop obsessing over arrival, you start embodying it. You move differently, you choose better, you react less. And suddenly, the timing shifts. Not because you forced it, but because you became someone who could sustain what you once begged for, and that naturally leads to the next truth most people avoid. Because readiness isn't just about skills, it's about facing the parts of you that were never meant to stay hidden. You couldn't move forward without meeting the parts of yourself you kept in the dark. The shadow wasn't an accident, it was curriculum. Every flaw you tried to hide, every impulse you judged, every emotion you pushed down became part of the training. Life has a strange way of dragging those parts into the light, not to shame you, but to integrate you. Wholeness isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming honest. Most people want growth without confrontation. They want destiny without discomfort. But the unconscious doesn't work that way. What you refuse to face begins to control you. That's why patterns repeat. Same mistakes, different faces. The shadow keeps knocking until it's acknowledged. And when it finally shows up, it feels messy, emotional, even embarrassing. But that chaos is a sign of progress. Suppressed material is surfacing so it can be transformed. You've seen this play out. Maybe you noticed jealousy where you wanted peace. Anger where you expected calm, fear where you thought confidence lived. Instead of labeling these reactions as failure, see them as information. The shadow reveals unmet needs, old wounds, and ignored truths. This is where patience becomes crucial, because integration takes time. You don't erase the shadow, you teach it where it belongs. Here's something practical you can actually do. Start observing your emotional spikes without judgment. When something triggers you, pause and ask, what part of me feels threatened right now? Write it down. Patterns will emerge. Reading helps too. Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson is a powerful guide. Combine reflection with action. If anger shows up, channel it into physical movement. If envy appears, use it as a map toward what you truly want to develop. Once the shadow is integrated, something surprising happens. Your energy stabilizes. You stop leaking power through denial. Confidence feels quieter, grounded. Meaning deepens. And suddenly, the path forward feels clearer, not because life got easier, but because you became whole enough to walk it. Still, there's another layer waiting. Because after confronting the shadow, you begin to understand why suffering itself played such a critical role in shaping your destiny. Suffering didn't show up to break you, it showed up to give shape to your life. Without it, everything stays shallow. You might smile more, but you wouldn't know yourself. Pain has a way of stripping illusions, cutting through noise, and forcing the real questions to the surface. When life hurt, it wasn't asking you to endure blindly, it was asking you to understand. Meaning doesn't arrive when things are easy. It's forged when endurance meets awareness. Think about the moments that changed you the most. They weren't comfortable, they were heavy, confusing, and lonely. But look closer. Those moments sharpened your perception. You became more patient, more selective, more conscious. Suffering refined your values. It showed you what actually matters when everything unnecessary falls away. That's why two people can go through the same pain and come out completely different. One resists it, the other extracts meaning from it. Here's the shift most people never make. They try to escape suffering instead of listening to it. But suffering is information. It tells you where alignment is missing. Burnout points to boundaries ignored. Anxiety points to truth avoided. Heartbreak points to attachment without self-respect. When you decode the message, pain loses its chaos. It becomes direction. That's when destiny starts to feel intentional instead of random. You can apply this immediately. When something hurts, don't rush to numb it. Sit with it briefly and ask, what is this asking me to change? Then take one concrete step. If you're exhausted, simplify your schedule. If you feel empty, invest in learning. Books like Man's Search for Meaning don't just inspire, they reorganize perspective. If you feel lost, create structure. Morning routines, physical movement, fewer distractions. Small order creates psychological relief. Once suffering gives birth to meaning, it stops owning you. You still feel pain, but it no longer defines you. It strengthens patience, deepens compassion, and anchors purpose. And with meaning in place, silence begins to feel different, not empty, but intentional. Because after suffering clarifies purpose, life grows quiet again. And that silence isn't absence. It's preparation for something even deeper. Silence isn't emptiness, it's compression. When life went quiet, it wasn't ignoring you, it was tuning you. Noise builds reaction, silence builds clarity. In those stretches where nothing happened, where messages slowed and attention faded, something subtle was taking place. Your inner voice was getting sharper. You were learning the difference between what you want to say and what actually needs to be said. Depth is born in quiet, not in applause. Most people fear silence because it removes distraction. No feedback, no validation, just you and your thoughts. And that's uncomfortable. But silence forces honesty. It shows you which ideas are borrowed and which are yours, which desires are ego-driven and which come from meaning. This is where patience matures. You stop talking just to be heard and start listening to understand. And once that shift happens, your words gain weight. You've probably noticed this already. After a difficult phase, you speak differently. You interrupt less. You explain more clearly. You choose words with intention. Silence trained that. Like a bow pulled back before release, quiet tension builds power. When your voice finally emerges, it carries experience, not theory. People feel it. Not because you're louder, but because you're grounded. Here's a practical way to use silence instead of fighting it. Create intentional quiet spaces, morning time without social media, walks without headphones, even 5 minutes of stillness before reacting to a problem. Let thoughts surface without rushing to fix them. Write what comes up. Over time, you'll notice patterns, and clarity follows patterns. Books help here too. Deep Work by Cal Newport isn't just about focus, it's about reclaiming depth in a noisy world. Eventually, silence stops feeling like exile and starts feeling like strategy. You realize it was shaping your message, not muting it, and once your voice carries truth instead of noise, timing shifts again. Because now, the pace isn't set by the world, it's set by something deeper. Something that has been guiding you all along, beneath awareness, quietly determining when you're ready to move forward. You think you decide when things happen. In reality, something deeper does. The unconscious moves like a hidden current, slow, deliberate, and impossible to rush. You can push all you want on the surface, but if what's underneath hasn't integrated yet, progress stalls. That's not failure, that's intelligence at work. Your psyche knows the cost of premature movement, even when your conscious mind is impatient. This is why forcing outcomes always feels exhausting. You're fighting timing instead of aligning with it. When the unconscious isn't ready, motivation fades, clarity blurs, and effort feels heavy. But when alignment clicks, action feels almost effortless. You wake up with energy, decisions simplify, you stop overthinking. That's the signal most people miss, not excitement but coherence. Everything starts pointing in the same direction. You've felt this before. There were moments when things suddenly flowed. Ideas connected, conversations opened doors, opportunities appeared without chasing. That wasn't luck. That was internal alignment. The unconscious had finished its work. The shadow was integrated enough. Patience had matured. Meaning was clear. So the pace changed, fast on the outside, but only because it had been slow on the inside first. Here's how you work with this instead of against it. Pay attention to resistance patterns rather than fighting them. If something consistently drains you, step back and ask why. If something quietly pulls your interest again and again, lean in. Create space for the unconscious to speak, journaling before bed, reflecting after setbacks, noticing recurring dreams or themes. These aren't random, they're guidance, delivered in symbols instead of instructions. Once you trust that the unconscious sets the pace, anxiety loosens its grip. You stop panicking about delay. You stop comparing timelines. You move when it's time to move, and when you do, action carries power instead of desperation. And that's when you begin to notice something unexpected. What you were chasing all along wasn't waiting ahead of you. It was slowly being built into you. And that realization shifts the entire direction of the journey. You thought you were chasing a goal, but the truth is subtler and far more powerful. What you wanted wasn't sitting somewhere in the future waiting to be reached. It was quietly reshaping you from the inside out. Every delay, every test of patience, every encounter with resistance was altering your identity. Desire wasn't pulling you forward, it was working on you. And that's why the process felt personal. Because it was. Most people misunderstand desire. They think wanting something is about acquiring it, but deep desire is formative. It reorganizes values, habits, and perception. You don't chase meaning, you grow into it. Along the way, your priorities changed. Things that once excited you lost their grip. Things that once scared you began to call you. That shift didn't happen overnight. It happened because experience was refining who you are, not just what you get. Look back honestly. The version of you who first wanted this outcome couldn't sustain it. That version lacked patience, depth, or clarity. So life stretched you. It introduced suffering, silence, and waiting, not to slow progress, but to mature desire. Over time, you stopped wanting the result for validation and started wanting it for alignment. That's when desire stops being noisy and becomes precise. Here's something you can do right now. Track how your desires evolve. Write down what you want today and why you want it. Revisit it in a few months. You'll notice the why changes before the what does. That's growth. Support this process intentionally. Read books that reshape identity like Atomic Habits by James Clear or As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. Build habits that reflect the person you're becoming, not the person you used to be. Eventually, you realize the goal was never separate from you. It was a mirror, forcing evolution. And when becoming catches up with wanting, arrival feels natural, not explosive. Calm, grounded, almost obvious. And that's when you're ready for the final shift. Because once you've become what you sought, there's only one question left. Are you now capable of carrying it without losing yourself? There's a quiet difference between getting what you want and being able to hold it. Most people focus on arrival, but very few are prepared for permanence. Now, after patience, resistance, shadow, silence and meaning, you're different. Calmer, sharper, less reactive. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable, not because the weight is lighter, but because you are stronger. This is what preparation looks like: subtle, internal, undeniable. You no longer need urgency to prove your worth. You move with intention instead of impulse. When challenges appear, you don't panic, you assess. That's maturity. The unconscious has done its work, aligning instinct with awareness. This is the moment Carl Jung pointed to when he spoke about individuation, the stage where inner contradictions are integrated rather than fought. You don't fracture under pressure anymore. You adapt. Notice how your reactions have changed. You pause before responding. You choose your battles. You understand that not every opportunity is your opportunity. That discernment is gold. It's what protects meaning from being diluted. You can now handle responsibility without losing yourself, ambition without anxiety, progress without desperation. That balance didn't come from talent. It came from time, patience, and suffering properly understood. Here's how you anchor this stage in real life. Protect your energy like it matters, because it does. Say no faster. Create structure that supports depth, consistent sleep, focused work blocks, intentional relationships. Keep learning, but selectively. Read fewer books more deeply. Revisit ideas instead of chasing novelty. This is how you sustain what arrives. Success that isn't maintained becomes another form of loss. And here's the subtle truth. This isn't the end. It never is. But now, the cycles change. What comes next won't be about proving yourself. It'll be about expressing what you've integrated, teaching, building, leading in quiet ways. And as this new phase unfolds, there's one thing left to do: step back and see the whole journey clearly. Because when you do, the meaning of it all becomes undeniable. Now the responsibility is yours, not to admire these ideas, but to live them. Look at your life honestly and ask yourself where you're still rushing, where impatience is stealing meaning, and where resistance is still trying to teach you something you keep avoiding. What would change if instead of fighting delay, you used it as preparation? What kind of person would you become if you treated suffering as instruction instead of punishment? This knowledge only transforms you if it moves into action. Apply it in the way you make decisions, in how you respond to setbacks, in the standards you set for yourself. Slow down where depth is required. Act decisively where clarity already exists. Stop asking life for shortcuts and start asking who you're meant to become next. Because destiny doesn't arrive through luck. It arrives through readiness. So now I ask you, what part of your life are you ready to stop blaming and start understanding? What truth are you prepared to face so the next chapter doesn't repeat the last one? Sit with that. Let it challenge you. Let it change how you move tomorrow. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and turn on notifications. This channel exists for those who think deeply, feel intensely, and refuse to live on the surface. Stay here and keep learning how meaning, patience, and consciousness shape a life worth living.